Welcome to another coding challenge. And I hope that you really are finding these useful. And if you do, then it's now time to build a reusable text expander component. So here I have 3 of these text expander components that we are going to build. So a text expander is basically when we have some part of a text and then we have this kind of button here that when we click it will reveal the entirety of the text. And then when we click it again, it will go back to hiding it. So this one here is basically one of the text expander components. And then here we have another one. And immediately you see that this one has by default a lot more text. And then this button here has some different text than this one and also a different color. But then when we click it, the behavior is exactly the same. Then finally, we have another one, and you see that this one has some different styling, and also by default, it is open. And so then when we click here, it will close. So let's go here to the starter code, which as always, I have attached as a link to this lecture. And if for some reason you don't want to build this challenge here on Code Sandbox, just copy paste the code from here and also from the CSS file. So that's not a lot, but we will still need that. All right. So here I already have the 3 components included inside the app, and the component itself right now only renders this to do. And so, yeah, this here is your to do. So to build this expander right here. Now, by including these 3 text expanders here, I'm already giving you a hint into what the public API of this reusable component will look like. Because here we already used many of these props. And so from this, you can kind of imagine what each of them does in order to achieve the 3 results that we saw here. So the challenge for you is to now actually go ahead and implement this text expander using everything that we have learned up until this point. And if for some reason this is a bit difficult, then just imagine this as a collaboration between you and me, basically. So you build as much as you can on your own, and then if you can't move on anymore at some point, you simply watch the rest of the video where I will then basically help you completing this component. And if you want, you can of course also go crazy with this one and include even a lot more props than just the ones that you see here. So you can really do a lot of customization here if you want, but of course it's also more than enough to just do what we have here. So this is a really nice exercise, which I hope you will complete, or at least part of it, and then I see you back here with my implementation. Okay, and let's get to work. And I will immediately start by copying all these prop names here. So selecting them one by one, then copy, and then I will just receive them here. Then of course, just some commas. And then we can get to work. And in fact, we are actually missing one, which is basically just the text here. So of course, inside of the expander, we need access to the text. Now this text is between the opening and the closing tag. And so what that means is that this is the children of this component. So it's going to be inside the children prop. So to start, we can actually immediately render that here, just so we see that this works. And indeed, here we get the 3 pieces of text that we have right here. Great. So we already have part of the output, but of course we also want that button. So let's do that. And here let's immediately allow the user to pass in a class name. So in this last one here, the user passes in this box class name. And so here we then accept that. And so then let's add it right here. So class name equals class name, like this. And so this is exactly what we also did in our reusable star rating component, right? Now in that example, we didn't actually have a class name, but now we have. And so immediately you see that this third one here got this different styling. Okay. Now let's place this text here inside a span so that then we can add the button. All right. And now the text of the button can actually be customized. So that is what we have the prop of the collapse button text for. So let's get that, place that here, and then we have some error. So let's see what's happening. Now we're not closing the span, so that doesn't look too good. And so here we already have one button. Now here then we have this like kind of very small button which doesn't have any text. And so that's because only this second text expander is actually passing in the text for the collapse button text property. And so that's because this text here, so this label of the button, is different from the default. So if we take a look here, then you see that by default, this one and this one display the text show more. And so then this one here is different and it says show text. So yeah, this one here is show text. And here it is actually expand. Okay, so expand button text should be by default show more. And so now here we have show more, then this one that's different, show text, and then again show more right here. But now, of course, we want something to happen when we click on this button. So we want only part of the text here to be visible. So we need some state, right? So let's call this is expanded and set is expanded. Use state, and then by default, let's make it false. So by default, the text should not be expanded. So we only want to see a small piece of the text. All right. And just make sure that your use state was correctly imported. Okay. And now let's use this is expanded state in order to calculate or to compute the text that we actually want to display here. So let's do that in a separate variable, and let's call it the display text. So if it is expanded, so if expanded is true, then we want all the text to be shown. And so that's then the children, right? So children is that text. That's why we place that here in the beginning, right? But if not, then we want something else. So let's just write test there just to experiment. And then we will, of course, replace the children here with that display text. And so by default, now all three of them have this test here, which is this part. And so again, that's because by default is expanded is false. Now, actually, if we take a look at one of these components here, then this last one will have the prop of extended equals true. So right here, I don't have that. So I have this one, but in the starter file that you will see, I will not have this one, but instead expanded. Okay, so again, in the starter file that I had here, I had a mistake. So we had the wrong prop here, and instead we want an expanded prop and not this one. So here it's not button inline, but expanded. But in the code that you see, this will already have been fixed. So the meaning of this expanded prop is that if it is set to true, then by default, the component here will be expanded. And so that's exactly this third situation right here. So if we reload this one here, then you see that the third text expander is by default already expanded. Okay, and so that's because expanded is set to true. So here, let's now actually not use false, but really get this initial state from expanded. And so then we can set expanded to false by default. And so this is very similar what we also did in our star rating component. So there we also set the initial state based on one of the props, right? So by default, we now have this last one here already opened. And so this one shows the entire text, while these ones here for now only show test. Now another thing is that in this case that the text is expanded, here the text, so the label of this button should be different. So it should be show less by default. And so let's do that here again as a default prop. So show less. And so then here, let's conditionally display that text. So if is expanded, then show the collapse button text, and if not, then show the expand button text. And so now it says show less. And so this other component here will then show collapse text instead of show less. So because it passes in this special prop that we have defined here. And if all of these props here and all these default values here look very confusing to you, well, that's just because we are really trying to make this component here very flexible and reusable. So just like we did with our star rating component. When we build our normal components in applications, we will not do this, right? We will then usually have the text directly in here, for example, instead of relying on the props and on default values of those props. But again, here we are striving for maximum reusability. But anyway, let's now finally actually make this button work. So, specifying the onClick prop. Here we just need a function, and then let's say set is expanded. And then the new state will be based on the current state. So we use the callback function here. And instead of writing the entire word, let's just say exp, which stands for expanded. And then we just toggle that here. And that's it. So let's see. And indeed, as we click there, the text is now hidden. And if we click on one of these, then it will show the text. And again, it will then hide it. Great. Now, next up, let's take care of not displaying the test here, but instead displaying some actual part of the text. Now, notice how here we have this prop, which says collapsed number of words. And so here, let's again specify a default, which is 20. But of course, it could also be any other value. So the idea here is that by default, when the text is collapsed, it will only display exactly this number of words. So only 20 words. But then you have, for example, this component here, which shows more words. So 20, this one should then actually be 10, so that this one here shows, in fact, more words. So by default, only 10 words should be displayed. So let's do that. So this is just some standard string and array manipulation. So we can simply split this string by the empty space, which will then give us an array. And then we can slice, or in other words, we can take all the elements from 0 all the way to collapsed number of words. So by default, we take the first 10 words. So from 0 to 10. And now this is still an array, and so we need to put it back to being a string. And then we also want to add at the end these 3 dots. Okay, and we could have used a template literal for this, but we can also just add them here at the end like this. So that works the same way. And so, as we click here, it shows all of them. And otherwise, it just shows exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 words plus these 3 dots. Beautiful. So that is already working. Now all we have to do is to take care of the styling of this button. So let's again specify an object here. Let's say button style, and then background, set it to none. Also no border. And again, this is necessary because we want this component here to be 100% reusable and standalone. So it cannot depend on any external styles. So let's also set a cursor to pointer. Let's give it some margin on the left side of 4 pixels, or let's say 6. And finally, we also want to give it a text color. And so this is where this button color prop comes into play. So let's grab that and place that here. And now all we have to do is to assign this here to the style prop. So style, button style, give it a save, and beautiful. So now this button looks more like text, but it is still missing some color. So let's by default add some blue color here, which is 1F09 CD. All right, and there we go. So the second one again is personalizing not only these 2 texts here on the button, but also the color and the number of words. And so that's why this one here looks quite different. And then again, this one here has this special styling here that's coming right from our CSS file in the form of this box class. Great, so this is working. And in fact, we are now basically finished. So this text expander component is now highly reusability, and it hides all the complexity from the user, so from the consumer of this component, which again is really nice and really important. So as the developer of this component, then we chose the public API basically, and therefore allowed the user to customize it to their needs. And as always, we could have gone really crazy here and, for example, allow the user to place this button here in different places, like below or on the left side or here right at the very beginning. We could have allowed some more styling here of the entire component, or we could also allow the user to specify whether they want to see these 3 dots here or not. But again, that's just not necessary, because with this we found a nice balance. So this is the interface that we chose.